Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here and really honored to have our esteemed guests with us today. My name is Kristen Barrett, and I'm the Senior Director of the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship. Here, the space that you're in is the Polsky Exchange, and we're thrilled to have you here today. We wanted to welcome you in particular because we are kicking off today Innovation Fest. It's a month of events focused on innovation here at University of Chicago, and we'd love for you to join us for any and all of them. You'll actually find a listing on your seat, which you've hopefully noticed, and we'd really encourage you to go outside your comfort zone, go see something you haven't seen before, a discipline you've never touched before, and come and join us for many things. Next week, we have a legal boot camp for entrepreneurs, and we'd be thrilled to have you here for that. Or come and see our globally recognized New Venture Challenge here at the end of the month. So as we do this, I'd love to introduce, and I'm excited to turn over the conversation to Gretchen Crosby-Sims to get started. But here at the Polsky Exchange, we'd invite you to visit us again. This space is actually normally co-working space for our entrepreneurs. So we'd love for you to have a chance to see that, our many events, and engage with us as we explore entrepreneurship and innovation here at University of Chicago and with our local community. So thanks so much, and welcome.
Hello, I'm Gretchen Crosby-Sims. I am the ED of the Institute of Politics. We're delighted to be partnering with Polsky Exchange on this event, and we are really honored to be welcoming Senator Cory Booker to Hyde Park this afternoon for a conversation with the IOP Director, David Axelrod. I want to mention a few upcoming events. Tomorrow evening, we are going to host a panel discussion on the surge of women running in 2018. I would love to see many of you there. Next Wednesday, May 9th, we have Jeffrey Toobin of The New Yorker, who will be sitting down with the U Chicago law professor David Strauss to discuss the current Supreme Court term and what to look for as the court begins announcing its opinions. You can find out more about these and other upcoming events at our website at politics.uchicago.edu. I would like to know, how many students do we have here in the audience? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, all of you have an assignment. We have the IOP end of year student survey, which gives us feedback that we use to improve our programming for next year. We would be really grateful if you students would make the effort to just give us a little bit of feedback, no matter how involved you are. You need to fill it out by Friday. It won't take long, and you will have a chance to win one of 5 $50 Amazon gift cards. You can find the survey announced in the Thursday newsletter that goes out, either last week's if you have it, or it'll come out on Thursday, and you can do it Thursday night. Thank you in advance. We will be taking audience questions after the moderated discussion. We'll have a microphone in the middle. Questions end with a question mark. We are anticipating that we will have a number of them today, so please keep your questions brief. And we will reserve the first 3 for students. At this point, my last reminder is to put your phones on silent, please. And here to formally introduce our speaker is Darian Day. Darian is a 4th year from Guyana, South America, studying sociology. She is chair of the Leaders of Color Initiative at the Institute of Politics, as well as co-chair of Leg Up Woodlawn, which are 2 of our civic engagement groups. And most importantly, she is celebrating having handed in her BA senior thesis last night. Darian.
Look at the lightness.
All 4th years feel this right now. Hi, everyone. I am so pleased to be here with you guys today and to have the chance to introduce our guest speaker, Senator Cory Booker. Since 2013, and after serving as the mayor of Newark, Senator Cory Booker has served as the U.S. Senator of New Jersey. During his tenure, Senator Booker has been one of the more prominent advocates for criminal justice reform, greater economic mobility for Americans, and greater technological innovation in the United States. As a member of the U.S. Senate Committees on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Environment and Public Works, Foreign Relations, and the Judiciary, Senator Booker has pioneered solutions that address some of our most complex challenges. From jump-starting increased investment in New Jersey's transportation system to calling for the support of increased innovation in connected device technology, Senator Booker has proven to have a great understanding and appreciation for what it truly takes to make a discovery and entrepreneurial endeavors continue on a path of progress. Today's conversation will be moderated by IOP Director David Axelrod, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Senator Cory Booker and David Axelrod.
Thanks, Darian. Senator, welcome to this incredible space, and thanks to all of you for being here. I thought, as I approached, that it took a bit of sense of humor to schedule the nation's most prominent vegan at an event next to Five Guys. But as you point out, there's a vegan restaurant down the street as well. So, this is a place devoted to innovation. You were involved in the hearing, I believe, when Mark Zuckerberg came.
Yes.
It seemed from a distance, watching your colleagues, that it was a little bit like the 21st technology meets Jurassic Park. What did you draw from that hearing, and how are you, as someone who's thinking about the future, how are you thinking about how we harness the good that Facebook and other social media platforms offer and still protect our privacy and indeed our democracy?
So if I can take a step back, first of all, it's great. It is great to be here, and thank you all for coming out. So appreciate you. And it's really great to sit with you, David, who I've long since admired and respected.
Thank you.
I feel a sense of gratitude because I know how difficult your work has been over the last decade.
Wow.
As a guy, you don't miss a team until they're gone. And as I think I joked with you once before.
Yes, we're looking pretty good. Huh?
I joked with him once. I told him I miss Obama, and I miss her husband too.
You're in the right neighborhood for that joke.
So, thank you. So when I got to the Senate, I was stunned at how technologically behind we were. I mean, it was you couldn't even bring a phone or an iPad to read notes on the Senate floor. It's not a searchable database. You would think that somebody said, I want all the bills about infrastructure and could search a database for that. No, you can't get information out of the place. It's almost designed to employ
maybe by
lobbyists.
design.
Yeah, to employ lobbyists, in my opinion, to have to go through what they're going through. And I was sort of stunned that I noticed right away that we weren't, as a government, moving at the speed of innovation. In fact, we were choking innovation. When I first got on, whether it was the troubles 23andMe was having, whether the whole drone industry was moving to places like France, where they were years ahead of employing drones for safety reasons, to do mine surveys. Our FAA was choking them. I joked with the head of the FAA one of my earliest hearings, and I said, look, if you were around during the time of Wilbur and Orville Wright, we would have never gotten off the ground. And so for me,
how was that received?
It was received with laughter from the crowds. He did not appreciate my joke. But they got the nature, and we moved forward. We created a better regulatory regime for that. For next generation nuclear, I can go through all the areas in which government is in many ways slowing down innovators, and innovation is moving overseas.
Right.
And so I in general, I have a real problem that we as an institution in the Senate are very slow and deliberative by design.
Yes.
It's an institution where here's a guy, I just turned 49 and I'm considered really young. It's the only environment I can go where I feel like I'm a kid again. And so I really have worries about as technology advances quicker and quicker and quicker, that we are as a government need to figure out ways to move so we support innovation. And this is where I really admired the former president, Obama, in that he started bringing in technologists for the first time and looking at complicated problems through the lens of technology and having really big breakthroughs. So for me, criminal justice reform is a huge issue. When the president put forth, in fact, I was just with Brian Stevenson in Alabama for the opening of the amazing museum. He was part of the 21st century policing task force that Obama created and infused with a technological look. And one of the things they found out, which is something I knew as a former mayor running police departments, that as much as we want to say in very simplistic, rudimentary terms, good, bad, looking at whether it's the behavior of a police officer, which many we've seen deserve some condemnation. But to me, I always knew as leading a complex city that there's layers in this. And so the 21st century policing, when I started talking to the technologists who were part of the president's committee, one of them said, well, we found out that you could use predictive analytics collect data and actually to figure out which police officers might go off the rails and violate laws, violate rights. In fact, that Texas pool party that we all know, where the 14-year-old African-American youth was literally sat on by a police officer, gun drawn, pointing at children at a pool party. I remember being horrified at that, and he was explaining to me that they found out one of the predictive analytics for looking at when a police officer might go wrong is the stress and trauma of suicide calls. And they found out that if a police officer has 2 suicide calls, that is very likely that something's going to happen. I used to work on a suicide hotline. Those calls are very emotional. And it turns out that this guy had multiple suicide calls leading into that event. And I know my police officers, I still remember a hostage.
He made the calls or he answered the calls?
He answered the calls. He was one of those folks. I still remember my police officers, there was a hostage situation in Newark. I'm on the phone with my police director trying to figure out how best to negotiate a way out. And suddenly I hear gunfire coming. I hear yelling in the background, go, go, go. Police officers run into a building, no situational awareness, run into a shooting where a woman tragically had put a pillow over her child, killed herself. Police are first on the scene trying to figure out a way if this baby can save a life. Gruesome, challenging, heroic works on officers. They go home the next night, come to work the next day. And what does that mean the next time the person's pulled over and somebody who they pull over starts yelling at them, which is their constitutional right to do? Right. What is that emotional state? So I say all this to say that I have always been one, especially as a guy who used technology as a mayor to radically increase my productivity. When I was using Twitter, for example, as a platform, my residents began to realize they could just tweet me, pothole, light out, and I would use that data.
You must have been the one who suggested this to the president.
I was wondering, my staff member and I had an over-under how far long it would go before we talked about Trump.
He actually, by executive order, says it has to be within the first 10 minutes.
Doesn't care what you say, just talk about me, talk about me. But we found just these technology platforms powerful tools to democratize everything from city services, access to information, and the like. So I know right now that the technology platforms are here to stay and they're profound ways of the future. But if you listen to my questioning, I was very concerned with how Facebook is being used by advertisers to discriminate against minorities. Clearly, they're using algorithms to say, well, we're not going to direct our advertising on home loans and other opportunities to areas we deem as not loan-worthy, which happen to be low-income African-American communities. And so where there is implicit racial bias, whether it's from policing all the way to loans, these things—
That's the tyranny of algorithm.
It's a tyranny of algorithm. We're seeing it, like I fight in criminal justice reform about how they assess the likelihood that somebody will, in bail reform, how they're assessing the likelihood that somebody will go on and commit another crime.
But just in the whole, and let me just say, as a matter, since we're talking about technology, this thing that's supposed to inform me about how long we're going is not working.
That's because they just want us to have freedom to go as long as we want.
It's kind of low tech. Someone could maybe text me and tell me.
Yes.
But what is to be done? You know, one of my concerns is that technology is churning so fast that we as a society can't get our arms around all its implications fast enough. And as you point out, in democracy, our government is designed to move slowly, and particularly when we are deeply divided. So we have a government that's moving very slowly now, and we have technology that's churning faster and faster.
Well, so we were a society just 2 generations ago that believed that we weren't going to let the future happen, that we were going to shape the future, that we were going to lead the future. And we made decisions as a society about things to shape that future. Now, I'm a huge believer that we made bad mistakes, and environmental disasters are an example of one way. We allowed companies to move so fast that often they've been outsourcing their pollution, outsourcing their toxins, and doing a lot of things wrong. But I don't want us to get away from this idea that our nation should pride ourselves in leading and shaping the future. If you look at this device here, and again, there's a lot of fear in this and worries.
For those in the back, he's holding up a cell phone.
This is a smartphone.
Yes.
And if you think about all of the things that have made this a globally impacting device, this is the United States taxpayer dollars, the touch screen, our collective investments in R&D, the battery life, our collective. In fact, GPS itself came from our collective investments in innovation. right now, we are living in this globally competitive world where our competitors, take the Chinese for example, are saying, we can never beat America tank for tank or warship for warship or missile for missile, but we're going to beat them in the future. They are now investing more of their GDP in innovation and research. We used to be the public-private,
yes.
We used to be the most R&D intensive country on the planet Earth. We're fading quickly as other countries are saying we're going to invest in AI, machine learning, biotech.
Well, you have the duality of reduced government investment and I talk about tyranny, the tyranny of the quarterly report.
Thank you for saying
that. So corporations are not investing in R&D the way they should.
It's brutal when you see that, and I've been interviewing CEOs and talking to them because my staff on our economic policy is thinking about this a lot. But you have the average stock hold back in my dad's generation being 8 years, and now you have the average stock hold being measured in months and weeks. And what that means is those corporations, that with these activist investors constantly at them, they are having to think instead about what the long-term benefit of my company is. They're thinking about, well, I just got to juice up that next quarter, and often make irresponsible decisions to satisfy not just the corporate raters, but also to satisfy how they're being measured.
Exactly, that's how they're compensated.
They're being compensated on the next quarterly report.
Yeah, we have so much to run through, and I do want to get to questions. When someone's going to signal me, I hope, when we need to go there. You sit also on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Yeah.
We've got two sort of emerging stories here that are related. One is in North Korea, where we've seen these kind of astonishing developments. And you may have heard the president on Saturday night say this is all my doing. But it is not wrong to suggest that for 25 years the North Koreans have thwarted the international community, thwarted American presidents, and proceeded apace on their nuclear program. So what credit does he deserve for the moment that we're at?
So you and I probably know from, you've worked in complex teams, I've worked for complex teams. If before you're talking about actually getting the job done, you're already talking about who gets credit. You actually diffuse energy, you diffuse, I think, in many ways, your ability to win and get to the goal. And so, again, for me, this is sort of like toxic masculinity that this president continues to show at a time that we need statesmanship, we need humility, we need the kind of leadership that inspires people coming together, and not what we're seeing from him right now. So I don't have a scorecard for what credit he has. I believe there's things that he's done along this pathway. There's no ambassador to South Korea right now. There's mistakes I think he's making in other areas of this diplomacy.
But the sanctions clearly have been useful.
Yeah, I'm glad that the Senate has given him sanctions to use. I'm frustrated that he hasn't used them in other contexts.
Yes.
Hasn't used them with Russia, isn't using them with Iran. I think he's about to pull out of a JCPOA.
I want to ask about that next. One question on North Korea. Is there a concern, do you have a concern that he is so now invested in spiking the ball? I know you're an old football player.
And claiming his Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes, and claiming his Nobel as they were chanting at his rally. First time at one of the Trump rallies that you heard people chanting Nobel.
Yes.
But are you concerned that he will make an unwise deal?
I am always concerned that he will make an unwise decision. I think that pulling out of the JCPOA is an unwise decision. I think that savaging our diplomatic corps like they've done is an unwise decision. I think wanting to flatline critical investments we're making in developing nations that actually work against terrorist interests is an unwise decision. He is a person that in a bipartisan way, if you've seen what we did to his proposed budget, is been unwise in his foreign policy, undercutting his own diplomats. And so this is a person that unfortunately is doing diplomacy by tweet, is managed to have a better relationship with Erdogan and Putin than he does with Merkel and May. So this is a guy that has.
Why do you think that is?
Again, it is a twisted road to try to understand his psychology that I'm not sure, but I do worry about America's presence on the planet Earth, how we are pulling away from leadership that we have provided humanity since the 1940s. And I think that this president is making terrible mistakes, from pulling out of the climate accords to the way he's handling Middle East issues, to his lack of response to the greatest humanitarian issues on the planet Earth. He talks tough in Syria, but has done nothing, in my opinion, to put forth a real strategy, has closed his doors to Syrian refugees, has, in many ways, I think, has a policy that is not helping tragic situations like Yemen that we should be talking about, cholera outbreaks, famine outbreaks, the DRC. I can go through the planet Earth, which I think is yearning for American leadership. I was in Zimbabwe a few weeks ago. Mugabe has just left as a terrible dictator. There's a new person there, and I was communicating with them, trying to communicate to them the urgency to hold free and fair elections with Jeff Flake, also on the Foreign Relations Committee. He and I chair and rank the Africa Subcommittee, and to just knowing that I'm there, and I've talked to other people in the leadership about the president's comments about African countries, the president's investment in diplomatics, trying to cut the budget for things like PEPFAR, deal with AIDS, and knowing they just came back from the Chinese, the leader, Gawa just comes back from the Chinese, who we see the news reports like, we don't care what you do inside your internal politics of your country. We're competing in a global setting right now against countries like Chinese, where we have been for a long time a value-based country that is doing incredibly good work, that is being undermined by a president that doesn't seem to share the agenda or even put forth a sense of courageous empathy towards the rest of humanity in a time of global crisis.
You introduced a bill to protect the special counsel. You and two of your colleagues, and the Judiciary Committee just voted out a bill that would set forward a process should the president decide to fire him. Do you consider that a likely development?
No, but I wouldn't have considered it likely that when I first introduced the bill with three other, my colleague on my side of the aisle, two colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I just didn't think that the bill would have gotten this far, but we passed it out of committee, which sent a very big signal in a bipartisan way that I think put folks on their heels. And the fact that we got Tillis and Lindsey to lead that charge in a bipartisan bill to protect the special counsel, I think was a very important accomplishment last week at a time that Trump, we know that internally, Lisa reports, is that he's been thinking about firing, stopped by one staff member who threatened to resign if he fired or ordered the firing of the special counsel. So when you are able to get bipartisan wins like that and send signals at a time where this president is unpredictable, and his unpredictability could often do things that could plunge this country into, in this case, in a constitutional crisis, I'm hoping that was, even if it doesn't become law, that bipartisan effort really sent a signal and put him on his heels.
You find it at all ironic that people on your side of the aisle suddenly are championing Jeff Sessions?
It's hard for me. I put a lot of myself into stopping him, and
I remember.
Yeah, and broke Senate tradition by testifying against him. My view of the world is where I left this morning. I live in Newark, New Jersey, and I live in the central ward of Newark, New Jersey. It's a predominantly black city. I live in a predominantly black community. I live in a low-income community where the median income is about $14,000 per family. I'm the only senator that lives in a community like this. And I have seen the devastation. To me, I believe the biggest cancer on the soul of this country is the criminal justice system, which is, as we sit here comfortably right now, there are thousands of children in jails, having even been convicted of anything, that are in conditions that other countries call torture, like juvenile solitary confinement, that we have women being shackled while giving birth, that we have a nation that will allow its roads and bridges to crumble, but yet will spend more money than humanity has seen before, building out a prison system, building a new prison every 10 days between the time I was in law school.
And interestingly, this is one issue where the left and right have found some, you have people on the other side of the aisle who want to work with you on this issue.
Yeah, and that's why when you say somebody like Jeff Sessions,
he's not one of those.
No, he was the guy that was one of the roadblocks to us passing something significant other than President Obama, and we had the momentum to get something significant done that would have corrected for just outrages like in fact, your Senator Dick Durbin took the 101 crack cocaine to powder cocaine disparity. Dick Durbin helped to negotiate that down. I think it was actually a gym in the gym got the Republicans to move to 18-1, which means that there are now people coming in and out of prison on the 18-1, while people on the 100-1 are still watching them. Same crime or lesser crime.
Disparity between
crack and powder cocaine.
And powder cocaine.
I mean, the horrors that are going on in this criminal justice system, and that Jeff Sessions has been one of the ones defending it. I love this. I think it was Weed 4 with on CNN just looked at the medical power of this drug, and you have still Jeff Sessions trying to turn back the clock on legalization.
You've got the Marijuana Justice Act that you've proposed to address this issue. Talk about that and how much take-up you're getting on that piece of legislation.
Well, a lot of people want to talk about the Marijuana Justice Act. It's the first major piece of legislation to delist marijuana on the federal level and stop there, which is great. That I'm really in favor of doing it, but I get very angry on the state level or the national level when people are so excited to run into legalization of marijuana, and that's where they stop, and they don't realize that marijuana and this enforcement in this country, prohibition in this country has been targeted towards poor people, targeted towards minority. It's no difference between blacks and whites in America for using marijuana or dealing marijuana, but African Americans almost 4 times more likely to be arrested of it. Most people don't realize we already have legal marijuana in this country. It's legal for privileged people. At Stanford University, where I went to school, there's no raids on people doing marijuana. Nobody's stopping and frisking kids coming home. If they did, they would have found a lot of drugs. But the president of my university hates when I say that. But the reality is this has been a targeted enforcement on communities of color and poor communities that have destroyed lives. There are people who can't get jobs, can't get business licenses, can't get Pell Grants for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing, and many members of Congress now freely admit that they did. And so if you talk about legalization, you're not talking about expungement. You're talking about legalization, you're not taking those tax revenues and reinvesting in communities like mine that have been devastated by the disproportionate war on drugs, which is a war on people, which has devastated economically my community because so many of the people, especially African American men, have lost their economic power because of this decades-long war. I get very frustrated. This is not just about allowing people to access marijuana. It should be about restorative justice, reinvesting in communities, expunging past criminals. What the irony is right now in some places that have legal marijuana is that people are rushing in. You see all this big money rushing in, but the very people who months ago were arrested for the drug can't even get a license because they have a formal conviction for that, and it's crazy.
And I mean, history seems to be moving in the direction of your legislation. That's if you look at polling.
Yes.
But my guess is that Congress isn't moving quite as quickly.
No, and again, this is like I wish I could make a lot of my colleagues live where I live for a month or 2 months. Because I still remember one Republican.
They might be conspicuous there.
They would be a little conspicuous. But on the floor of the Senate, I still remember a colleague comes over to me, a conservative Republican, and saying, I'll never, necessarily support your legislation, was the essence of what they were saying, but I don't think it's fair that college kids can have their life destroyed with a little bit of marijuana. And I was sort of surprised by the statement, and I just looked at him with kindness and just said, I think it's unfair that any kid would have their life destroyed by being caught with a little bit of marijuana. And most people don't realize this. They think, oh, we're seeing decriminalization. We had more people arrested for marijuana last year than all violent crime arrests. And so we have a serious crisis now with continued people to be churned into this system, into this criminal justice system at extraordinary expense to taxpayers for doing things, again, that presidents, corporate CEOs, and others do without worry of being caught.
Nothing that has visited minority communities disproportionately has been gun violence. We feel it strongly here. I know you've dealt with it in Newark. Do you think the Parkland kids have moved this issue? And what do you think the potential is for, 97% of Americans say that they support universal background checks, large numbers on bump stocks, majority on banning assault weapons for commercial sales. you've been exposed to the reality of the power of the gun lobby in Congress. What is your sense of the possibilities here that something may actually happen on this issue?
Yeah, so I just want to, first of all, one of the reasons why I love the Parkland students so much is because they understand that they are not operating in an island, but that the justice they seek is intimately interconnected with all communities in this country. Days after the Parkland shooting, the block that I live on had Shahad Smith, who was Shahad and I lived in the same building for about 10 years at the top of the block. I now live a little bit down the block, but Shahad was murdered with an assault weapon on my street. I've had a shooting, this second shooting on my street, on my block where I live, where my brother and his wife and my 10-year-old niece live. And I really respect, when I tweeted about Shahad being killed, the Parkland students immediately retweeted me and indicated that this is their fight, this is their importance. And so their ability to capture in the way—
They've looked beyond their own tragedy to the fact that this happens on our streets every day.
There's a mass shooting every single day, dozens of people being murdered. As we're sitting here again, there are people being shot in America in ways that are preventable, within our power to do something about, with common sense changes like you said that most of us agree on. And so I think this is a movement, not a moment, and I believe that the test of the movement will be in November, because nothing is happening in Congress. Nothing is happening. And until we start sending the signal in this country that there will be an electoral accountability for those people that don't move, that they're going to continue to stay. Because right now, I think there's a lot of my colleagues that are much more concerned about the NRA and sort of activists that are against the 90+% of Americans. They're more concerned about them than they are about us, the 90+% of us. And that's why, to me, I go back to this issue. The opposite of justice is not injustice, it's inaction, it's indifference, it's apathy. That we have the power to make this change, but we're not manifesting our power. And if you think about any intractable moment that was broken, and you think how it was broken, like did we get suffrage for women because a bunch of men in Washington, D.C. sat around and said, you know, it's about time that women get the right to vote? Did we get civil rights because Strom Thurmond thought, yeah, you know, those Negro people should have their rights? No, none of those things broke because folks in Washington decided to break it. It's because the people got so angry and so frustrated that they were willing to go beyond their comfort zones and become activists, advocate, march, demonstrate, creatively protest, until the people in Washington knew they either move or they lose. And that's the moment I hope we're building towards right now.
One of the another piece of legislation you've introduced is a Federal Jobs Guarantee and Development Act that would create 15 pilot programs that would essentially guarantee work in high unemployment areas. I guess inspired in part by things we've done in the past, the WPA, the CCC, and so on. Talk a little bit about that and what the cost of such a program would be, and what the cost of scaling such a program would be, and how one does that in a time when we have these enormous deficits that were exacerbated by some of the things that the Congress has done in recent months.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I just have this firm belief that was expressed with everybody from Martin Luther King to FDR, that people who want to work should be able to work. And we as a society should honor the dignity of a job and provide pathways towards that. And in fact, it is destructive when there is high unemployment rates, and we all can agree on that. And we've taken big steps and big programs, from unemployment insurance to a social safety net, to all try to stop people falling when they fall out of unemployment. Well, why not go right to the heart of the problem, which is trying to create jobs? And the reality is there are tremendous collateral benefits that a lot of the research shows. I've been studying it for quite some time. The collateral benefits are everything from actually raising the level of benefits for all employees. If you know you're working at a dead-end job, like I have a friend of mine, a close friend that works in an IHOP. She makes $2.13 an hour plus tips, no benefits, no paid family leave. So suddenly you have another job option for her, $15 an hour. IHOP is going to have to respond, or they're not going to have any workers. So it's going to help raise the level for everybody, which then creates even more resources that we've seen in places that have raised to $15 minimum wage. People tend to go out to dinner more. They have more disposable income, and it helps the economy. In addition to that, there are a lot of public goods that we're not getting done, from infrastructure work to expensive childcare. We could be addressing a lot of these things, a lot of public good. So I can go through all the benefits of it that are worth trying. But I think your question about the expense is the one that I was struggling with. So first of all, let's just understand that we are paying a lot already. I already mentioned for unemployment insurance, public housing, food stamps. I mean, if you look at all these programs that are trying to make up for either no work or inadequate paying work as companies outsource their labor costs on us, the taxpayers, those programs alone are billions and billions of dollars that we could be reinvesting in a program to give people the dignity of work. But in addition to that, I've watched in Washington now 5 years as a senator and a lot as a mayor, angry mayor who was just could not understand the priorities of a country, when I can give you a balance sheet analysis of how we should be investing. Like, my favorite study I looked at was Seattle, that looked at, what's cheaper for our society, to invest in supportive housing, which is really expensive, or to allow mentally ill people to remain on the streets. Well, Seattle looked at 23 people and found out they could save taxpayers about $1 million for every 20 or so people for putting them in supportive housing, because on the streets, people can end up in jail, end up in our emergency rooms. The morally right thing to do is that when I was mayor, I can't understand this, if you were doing a balance sheet analysis, we would be investing in so many things more in my city that would save taxpayers so much money. We are content as a society to spend so much more money on the back end of a problem, a jail or a prison or a hospital, than make strategic, smart investments on the front end. What we lack often is proactive prioritization. And so I watched just recently, it's stunning to me that we just passed tax legislation, that all these fiscal hawks suddenly were willing to allow a $2 trillion hole to be blown into our budget. CBO is now saying it's worse than they projected of what's happening right now in terms of driving this deficit. And where did that $2 trillion go? Did it go into our infrastructure? Did it go into pilot programs like the one I proposed? Did it go into our schools? No, where it went is over 80% of it went to the wealthiest Americans already who don't need the money, under the theory that somehow it's going to trickle down. And that is a lie that we've been hearing over and over again. And so we have resources in this country, and we are investing them in backwards ways that ultimately are far more expensive. I know the difference it makes for a family to have a $15 an hour job. I could walk you on my block and show you the difference between making $2.13 an hour plus tips and having $15 an hour. And perhaps the best difference it makes is for the kid in that. We know that magic poverty line, that if you grow up below that poverty line, that $2.13 an hour, only 9 out of 100 kids go to college. If you get above that line, it goes up dramatically. The most productive unit in this global knowledge-based economy now is the genius of our kids.
As you can see, this microphone's up, so if you folks want to line up, I just got a couple more things here before.
That's a very male-dominated line, for crying out loud. We need some gender balance in the line. This testosterone, this aggression. Can't we get any women in that line, for crying out loud? Let her at the front of the line. The first woman up should be able to cut to the front of the line here.
Or at least let's alternate.
Let's alternate.
I would be remiss if I didn't finish. First of all, when you start talking about dead-end jobs, I know someone with a dead-end job. I thought you were going to talk about some of your colleagues. But I also remember when I was talking to Senator Obama about whether he would run for president, that he said, if you are going to do public service, do it at the place where you can have the maximum impact. You're obviously someone who has enormous passion for all of this. We just saw that. And I know that the conformities of politics would suggest that you're not going to give me an answer to this question. But why wouldn't you
first line. First line. No, I'm sorry.
Why wouldn't you consider running for president?
Because first of all, I love the job I have. I sincerely do. As a guy who was in a mayor, who was a get things done job, I really was skeptical when I first got into the Senate.
Wouldn't you have a better chance of implementing all the things that you just talked about if you were president?
Absolutely. But the reality is there are 44, 45 people have done that job. I don't know what the future is going to look like in terms of who's running. When President Barack Obama ran, and you know this from the campaign, everybody in my region was on the Hillary train, but I saw something in him that really inspired me. Broke was the first person in the greater New York metropolitan region, I like to think of as greater Newark metropolitan region, to support a guy I thought was going to be a transcendent leader, and it proved to be the case. We are a long way from this. I do believe when things get tough, and I thought they were tough after the Bush years, and Obama came, and I'm not sure in the mosh pit of all the names that are talked about, maybe there's going to be somebody that you and I both will say, she's the one, and let's get involved in supporting them. So for me, and I tell my team all the time, and this is not being coy, we focus on our re-election in 2020. That's where my energy is. That's what lights me up in the morning when I get to go to work and represent my state and speak to national issues and drive the national conversation. I love all those things. But after the midterms, let's take a look at the field and make a final decision then.
All right, well, that last part is probably the most significant part of the answer. It took a while to get there, but all right, let's go to questions.
Hi, my name's Laura Brawley, and I'm...
First of all, thanks to the guys behind you that put that picture. That was really cool.
But I'm a third year in the college studying public policy
studies. What does that mean, a third year in the college? Do you guys not want to say junior anymore? They don't want to say junior anymore? It's like the cool thing.
I think they've been doing it for a while.
Okay, I'm sorry. I told you already, I admitted to you, I'm 49 years old. So to you, I'm ancient.
Not really.
Not really? Okay, you're generous. You're going to be a good politician. Keep going.
Why, thank you. No, my question is actually about the Paris Accords. So you mentioned the Paris Accords earlier and how the United States is planning on pulling out of them.
Yes.
But I've studied the Paris Accords in college, and they're not very effective. They don't have binding legal requirements for countries to meet in terms of reducing their emissions. So I was wondering if in a world in which you could get something like the Paris Accords to be supported by the United States again, how would you make the deal mean more?
So two things. One is, if you study the Paris Accords, we can't even pull out of the Paris Accords until like November of 2020, or I think after the next, God willing, the next president is elected.
It's the day of the presidential election.
It's the day of the presidential election. Wow. So I'm hopeful that at that point we won't pull out, or we'll have a new president who will be saying that we won't. That's number one. Number two is, I just literally was with Al Gore down in Alabama, who was talking very boldly about that the goals that were set, countries like India and others are beating the goals that they're set. But the final thing for me, and this is where I get very, again, I see everything through the lens of the communities that elevated me professionally, is I understand that we're part of this global compact, and I think these are very important. Symbolically, leadership, there's so many reasons to be a part of the Paris Accords. But we in the United States of America should be setting our own targets and setting more ambitious goals for ourselves and setting the standard for the world by moving as aggressively as we can to deal with the impact of the pollutants that are being put into the air. And the reason why I feel very strongly about these is because, again, a lot of people talk about climate change. I consider myself, and I'm happy to talk to people about climate change. I'm a guy that's driven by environmental justice issues. And it is outrageous to me, again, I often give speeches where I will not mention Donald Trump now because I believe that there's been reasons to march in the streets for years and years and years. And let me give you just an example. In my community, asthma rates are 3-4 times higher than the surrounding suburbs. My kids can't plant, we couldn't plant in the soil when we did our urban farming. We had to put in planter boxes because the soil is toxic. I have kids drinking out of plastic bottles in schools because the water is toxic. The river is, literally the Passaic River is a Superfund site in Newark. Our environment's so bad. And we continue to do practices in this country that should shock the consciousness of everybody. I drove through a number of southern states to focus on environmental justice issues. In Duplin County, North Carolina, there's like 10 million pigs. And for those of you who've had bacon recently, I'm sorry to go here, but pigs.
The vegan's revenge.
Pigs produce 10 times the effluents than human beings do, But in places like New Jersey, it's about 10 million people. We have systems to deal with that waste. You don't have that in North Carolina. So you have these massive, massive lagoons full of pig waste being sprayed upon spray fields. And guess where those spray fields happen to be? In poor communities, in minority communities, where they have respiratory diseases, cancers. And by the way, who's that pork produced for? Us? No, it's actually China who's treating us like a developing nation in terms of the way that we used to treat developing nations and outsourcing our waste on them and taking the finished product. That's what the Chinese are doing with these places. And so why aren't we speaking about this? Our rivers are getting polluted, our air is getting polluted, people are getting sick, all because corporations are outsourcing their cost. I can take you to Uniontown, Alabama, where a toxic coal ash spill in Tennessee was considered too egregious to happen. So they picked it all up and they dumped it in an African-American community in Alabama who had no say of having that stuff there. So I want us to get back to what is really this idea of a free market. You know, the ideas of the early economists said that a product, the cost of the product should incorporate all of the cost of its production. We don't have that anymore. So whether it's carbon being spewed into the air, or whether it's pig stuff being wasted and poisoning people, whether it's the fact that industrialists of old stole the Passaic River from the city of Newark by dumping their pollutants in it, we need to start having sound policy. And by the way, sound economic policy is sound environmental policy. And so your question about the Paris Accords, I can go on about the importance of being a part of it, but I want to get back to us leading the planet Earth in the things that are going to make our children and generations come more healthy, in green energy and technology, in environmental responsibility, in corporate responsibility, so that we make sure that people don't raid the commons and steal from future generations their wealth, their environment, in the name of calling it profits in the near term and the present term.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You are the man.
This guy always sprints to the mic to be the first guy. So,
but I love his shirt.
It was rough justice that he had to wait to ask the second question.
No problem. Sorry, but he was chivalrous.
I'm going to a game night tonight with Cards Against Humanity, so I had to wear a shirt that was appropriate for both occasions.
I love that. I love that. I wish I could hang out and play.
You're welcome to join us. I'm sure they would be happy to have you.
Right.
My name is Matt Enlow, and I'm a third-year graduating law student here at the law school.
Okay.
I really enjoyed your answer to the last question. I'd like to ask a question about tech and internalizing externalities.
Yes. Thank you very much for using the fancy economic terms.
So I took privacy with Professor Strahilovitz last quarter, and we were talking about the GDPR and the Facebook scandal and all of this modern startup culture, and how it seems like in order for startups to succeed in America, the story of nearly every modern large startup, all the companies that we really love, has been one of violating the law and then facing a lawsuit later to get the recompense to the victims of the laws that were broken. But it's probably the case that the companies are not properly compensating the victims, and they're certainly not internalizing their externalities when they're getting started. You talked about how companies need to do more innovation, and you also talked about, in environmental context, how we need to internalize our externalities. How will America reckon with startups internalizing externalities and complying with the law to change its economic and tech culture?
Dude, this guy's good. No wonder he jumps up to the front.
Anybody who had that same question, you can step up. Go ahead.
So just really quickly, I have this feeling that we've taken the idea of regulation and just said good and bad. It's either good regulation is good or regulation is bad. I don't believe that at all. I think there are positive regulations and I think there are negative regulations. I can give you examples. As mayor, I fought against regulations that were stopping me from doing things I knew would benefit the community that you know why I'm very urgent in supporting. And this is an area within tech where I feel like we have not figured out the regulatory regime that it's the right light touch, but also holding people accountable for their actions. And I think that we have to have a serious conversation in this country about regulating these spaces. And I think that you saw Mark Zuckerberg capitulate and say, we need to be regulated and sort of answer to that. And I've seen lots of companies come in and begin to understand that they need to either offer up ideas or we're coming out to regulate them. And so in the tech world, I have seen incredible collateral benefits, but I've seen horrific collateral consequences as well. And I believe that companies, as you said, should be held accountable for the costs they're trying to externalize or outsource to others.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you're playing a mean game of Risk, I might actually stay up late tonight. But Cards Against Humanity, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
There are a lot of games.
There are a lot of games.
Good afternoon, Senator. My name is Richard. I'm a third-year political science major in the college.
Richard, you have this voice made for radio. It's like, hi there, Cory Booker.
Well, thank you, sir.
Yes.
So my question is brief. You and many of your Senate colleagues have recently vowed to stop accepting campaign donations.
I wouldn't say many, 6 out of the 100.
Well, okay, let me not say that.
Okay.
Okay, but some of you all have vowed to stop accepting corporate PAC money. So the first question I have is, why did you make the decision now rather than earlier in your political career? And then the second question I have is, what structural changes need to be made to further reduce the risk of elite capture of our democratic institutions and democratic leaders like yourself?
Right. Well, so as mayor, you weren't taking political PAC contributions, so that's why I didn't make it earlier. I've been on the Senate for 5 years, and it's something we've been talking about for a while. And I learned through an episode that's too much to go into that even if I'm, which I think I am, person of integrity, even the appearance of impropriety comes, I think, when you're taking these corporate dollars. And I said, enough is enough, and let me do it. And I'm hoping that that's something that others will think about. But just not in defense of my colleagues, but I just want to give you an example of the challenge it is for other of my colleagues. And I won't even name a specific state, but imagine that there's a state, which there is, where you literally have millions and millions, tens of millions of dark money being poured upon that senator who is in a red state trying to hold on to their seat. And I come along, Cory Booker, in a bluish state and say, I've given up corporate PAC dollars, you should give up that money as well. And they're like, oh my God, I'm being drowned by corporate dollars and you want me to give up the few dollars I get? It's not affecting my vote. So I just want you to understand that the difficult decisions that often my colleagues have to make in a system that is fundamentally broken and corrupted ever since Citizens United, seeing what's going on, is outrageous in the way it's drowning out individual rights, speech rights, corporations who are not people who are being treated that way and allowed to pour as much money in. It is outrageous. And so the real fix, I think, it'd be great if 100 of 100 gave up this system, but that wouldn't stop the situation back in someone's home state. All of us have to find ways to be contributing to taking back our democracy and fighting to get things done that can reverse decisions like Citizens United and end this nightmare that we're in, where every election cycle, every 2 years, the record for more and more corporate expenditures in our records continue to go up. And what I see in Washington in just a handful of years there, to me, it's just getting to be sickening to see how much money corporations are spending. And I don't want to ever question the motives of my colleagues, but somehow it seems, especially as a guy, as I said, who has my entire political career lived in, worked for low-income communities, how the voices of the average citizen seem to not play as much as the desires of large corporations.
You accepted PAC money when you ran.
When I ran for Senate in 2013, and then I had to run an election immediately in 2014.
And you probably took corporate contributions, not PAC contributions, but corporate contributions.
You can't take corporate contributions.
When you were in for mayor?
When I was a mayor, I'm sorry, I can't even remember, but I don't think I could take contributions from companies in New Jersey.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator. I'm Simon. I'm a first year in the college. I'm in a class about democracy. And
so you don't use the frosh. You guys just don't use that.
He just can't get over this.
So what if you come to school with enough AP credits that you're technically a sophomore?
Well, I mean, I did a French degree, so I didn't have any credits whatsoever.
Okay, I'm confused. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in a class about democracy and like wealth redistribution.
Yes.
And I was just, I have a question on, do you think malapportionment in the Senate and gerrymandering in the House of Representatives, is that one of the major halts to your progressive policies? Do you think, for example, having a citizen of Wyoming have, I think, 50 times more voting power than a citizen of California in the Senate, is that stopping your progressive policies on criminal justice reform? So
this is the first time in my life someone's ever asked me a question with the word malapportionment in it, and I just want to thank you for that. I thought
you were going to say Wyoming.
Yeah. I get Wyoming questions in every Jersey town hall that I have. I don't know what you're talking about. So I have often wondered, like looking back and gone back actually as a senator even to read the details of the compromise that was made to give every state, regardless of population, 2 votes. And so now you do have states like Wyoming or Montana that have the same amount of sway when it comes to the Senate as California, which has 40 million people, and those states might have about 1 million or less. It is stunning to me, and I still remember when I lost my temper about an issue in a meeting. It was around the time of Ferguson, and at the time I'm only the 4th popularly elected African American in the Senate history, and so I was sitting there just steaming and just vented about implicit racial bias in our system and personal experiences I had. So I'm walking on the Senate floor now, and Barbara Mikulski, who was a senator from Maryland, looks at me, and she's like 4 feet and 11, and the most intimidating figure to me in the Senate. I was afraid of her, as I told her publicly many times, because she's ferocious as a peace warrior. And she goes, "Come here." I'm like, "Yes, ma'am." She goes, "Sit down," and I sit down next to her, and I scrunch down low to look at her eye to eye, and she goes, "This is an agrarian body." She goes, "That over there is a democratic body, and you need to understand that. And what I'm trying to tell you is not to stop raising your voice and fighting." And so I worry about that reality, and I worry that it does in many ways undermine what would be changed, but it's the compromise that we have. And
it's not going to change.
It's not.
It can't change physically, I think. Like if the 50...
My friend, the people who want to get rid of the Electoral College, the people who want to do all these things that would necessitate changing the very Constitution. So the last thing I want to say to you, though, is, but that doesn't mean that we can't make change. And it doesn't mean that we should surrender to cynicism about the system. Alice Walker said the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. And so to evoke, as I'm sitting next to a guy who was a leader in Team Obama, one of my favorite speeches President Obama ever gave was to Howard University in his last year in office. And he was going off about how can we live in a country where the biggest population bubble there is, which is millennials, votes in midterm elections at 19%. I don't care if you're a Republican millennial or Democratic millennial. I want you to vote because you believe in marriage equality, you believe in the problems of climate change, you believe in common sense gun regulation. Millennials, I don't care what your party is, you guys for marijuana legalization. I mean, I can go through all the things that the millennials believe in, but they don't vote. And so Obama's like frustrated in this speech. I could see his like pleading with people. He's like, "Look, you guys don't need to occupy anything, just vote." One of my favorite lines in a speech. So my point is that the change we seek, the progressive politics that I seek, can be accomplished without jiggering the system. It can be just by participating in the system. The big nut we got to crack is why, when so many consequential things are on the ballot with our voting, why don't we go out to vote? And we don't vote, and then we complain. You cannot complain if you do not vote.
Okay.
Thank you. I got to get to the next question. So thank you. Thank you. I just want to note for the record that 2 of those 4 popularly elected African American senators came right here from Hyde Park.
Yes.
So
yes.
Little parochial note there.
It was. It was.
Yes.
Hi.
Now, what year are you?
It's been a long time since I've been a freshman. The forces that work against environmental justice, social justice, educational justice, by and large have a pretty disciplined message. They define the message, they control the narrative to a larger extent that I think many of us would like. So how might the people who are opposing those viewpoints control the message? And more specifically, how did the Democrats keep from shooting themselves in the foot again?
So I would like to stop the Democrats by shooting themselves in the foot by having common sense gun control and not allow them to have weapons. No, look, I hear this everywhere I go. People want to know what's the Democratic message, what's the Democratic message? And You're not going to find this in the midterm election when you have Heidi Heitkamp and Tester running in the same election as Elizabeth Warren and Kirsten Gillibrand. It's just different messages and different people in different places and everything like that. And my hope for after 2018's election is that Democrats don't fight so hard to figure out what the Democratic message is as we work to think about what the American message is. Like what's going to talk to our common aspirations? How have we become this nation where there's common pain, where I can go to Appalachia, to Newark, and find people suffering from the same common pain, but we've lost our sense of common purpose. And there is a profound pragmatism to our collective ambitions, where people know what works. Other countries are doing what we did 2 generations ago. They're looking, let's look at the America model. They're invested in infrastructure. We're going to invest in infrastructure. They were the #1 investors in education. We're going to invest in education. They were the #1 investors in R&D. They're taking our playbook. I'm tired of other countries out-Americaning us. And so what I'm looking for right now is someone to rekindle the very ideas of America. And this is a little off topic for your question, but the first thing, and again, I believe, like my friends and I always talk about, we got to get back to a prosperity gospel, prosperity agenda, equality, justice. But this is unpopular, but I want to say it anyway because I think we're losing this. I have a lot of problems with our founders, as you just heard, and the way they designed this imperfect system that there's no better than, and the founders themselves, the way we try to deify them, which these were flawed, imperfect men who did manifest genius. But dear God, for everybody in this room, I mean, they called Native Americans savages in our Declaration of Independence. They didn't refer to women at all. African Americans were fractions of human beings. But let me tell you what they got right. And this is what I want some bodies. I don't think it's going to be one leader that's going to lead us back to this, but it needs to be all of us accepting our leadership responsibilities. This is the one thing they got right. They knew that this country, remember, we're the oldest constitutional democracy. It was a radical break that this country was not formed along tribal lines. I can show you dozens and dozens of countries were formed because they're all the same ethnicity. I can show you countries that were formed because they all prayed the same. They're theocracies. We broke with human history and said, we're going to found this nation on these bold ideas that are going to be so much bigger than the flawed people that did it, that every generation, read the speeches of Susan B. Anthony. What did Martin Luther King say at the March on Washington? They all spoke to the majesty of the ideas that America had to live up to them. Every generation has been trying to make this more perfect union. But they understood something that I think is often forgotten, that if you're going to form a country that doesn't have these common chords that connect men and women, race, religion, tribe, ethnicity, if this country is going to be different than that, then we have to make an unusual commitment to one another. We have to get a deeper commitment to one another. They ended the Declaration of Independence with these words that say we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now, this idea of sacred honor, to me, it comes in many different ways. It's expressed in many different ways, but to me, we've lost it because we start talking about this being a nation of tolerance. Now, tolerance says I'm just going to stomach your right to be different. And if you disappear off the face of the earth, I'm no better off or worse off because I was just tolerating you, like I tolerated the cold I had last week. Tolerance is, to me, a cynical state of mind. Sacred honor, to me, is another way of saying love. And that's the word that, to me, has been cheapened in our dialogue, because love is hard, love is difficult. Love says, I see you, I see your worth, I see your value, I see your dignity. But more than that, love says, I see that I need you, that you and I have interwoven destinies, that if your children fail, my children are bereft of their genius, of their artistry, of their teaching, of their invention. Love says that we can only get there together, like the old African saying says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. The generations that have advanced in this country are the generations that have found ways to come together. Rugged individualism and self-reliance are great American traits, fine, let's celebrate them, but rugged individualism didn't get us to the moon. Rugged individualism didn't map the human genome. Rugged individualism didn't build our highway system. It was our ability to come together with a sense of sacred honor. And so this is the call that I have right now, that is not something that has to wait for an election. It doesn't have to wait until 2020. Whoever you are, ask yourself, are you bringing to this situation sacred honor? Why do I see people on social media platforms? I hugged John McCain on the floor of the Senate, right on the C-SPAN cameras. 24 people saw me. And I hugged him. And by the time I got home that night, I was being torn apart on Twitter by progressives who were saying, how could you hug that man? Think about this for a second. Have we gotten to a point in American culture where we so demonize each other, that we've so lost that sense of sacred honor, where our founders, they had hatred, they had so many things between them to stop them from coming together, but they found a way to bond. And so my hope for this country, at a time where we are somehow seem to be digging into our divides, that we seem to have an arrogance of contrast, that we find a way in this generation now to recognize that the ties that bind us are so much stronger than the lines that divide us, and that there's only one way that our country can move forward. I don't care what the partisan messaging is in the future. I'm hoping that we all start messaging now to the common aspirations, the common ideals, to the sense that we need each other, that we call this country again to a period of love.
So, unfortunately, I think I can take, or we've got one more question. I just want to say, and this is a whole nother conversation that we're going to have some time, but I embrace everything that you just said, but it goes back to the first question I asked you, which is, we also live in a modern media and communications environment in which we have the ability to wall ourselves off as we never did before, in which our views are affirmed and not informed, and everybody outside that silo is alien or worse.
Yes.
And that lends itself to tribalism.
Yes.
And that's a challenge that we haven't faced to this degree in the past.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge of this moment, and it's not somebody else's challenge, it's our own challenge. Is how do we begin to break down those walls that are our own echo chambers? And how do we find ways to inspire, like activists in the past, a sort of a moral majesty, a courageous empathy, the ability for the children in Birmingham to call to the moral consciousness of this country and to expand it was profound. The Parkland students.
Yes, they are in that category.
They've been able to instigate that more courageous empathy. And so I think the activists of this time, it's not just about the things...
Partly, by the way, because they understand social media, because they're young enough to understand.
Exactly. I tell people the story. I didn't know who Coney 2012 was, and I was a mayor at the time, but it was people using these platforms, the very platforms that others used to divide us. They're using it to create deeper connection. I see the organizing going on. I met with these leaders, mostly suburban women, many of whom identify as Republican, who are now activating in groups like Moms Demand Action and other groups to press for change. So this is not a fait accompli. This is not a time, as I said before, to surrender to cynicism about the system. It's a time for us to use our gifts of imagination and create ways out of the traps that right now hold our society. And just back to those people who talked about our founding fathers and earlier generations, every generation has seen deep divisions. I mean, dear God, the Civil War,
yes. That was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So for the record, I'd also give John McCain a hug if you got the chance.
Really?
Thank you for joining us, Senator Booker.
You have an astonishing amount of hair, which is very, I feel like you did this to just get me, you're mocking me right now. Admit it. Is it my own insecurities, or are you just?
I think it might be that might be you. But so my name is Ronan Shatsky, and I'm a second year here in the college. And this morning, I went to class and we talked about the school reform in Newark.
Yes,
which you were involved in.
Yes.
And so a lot of money, a lot of energy, a lot of optimism went into that. And in the end, it's kind of controversial whether it was a success. And I'm assuming you're in the position where you're pretty optimistic about how it turned out. But I still would like you to speak about what did not go as planned and what could be done better when we try to do this in the future. Because I know you were envisioning it as a model for school reform across the country.
So this is where I'm almost exasperated, because I don't understand. When I was mayor of the city of Newark, I used to say, "In God we trust, but everybody else bring me data. Show me the numbers." And so you have to understand. And I almost, Mr. Shatsky, you don't have the microphone anymore, but I just need to understand, what is controversial about the outcome, the data that just came out in the Harvard study? Did you guys look at that? Okay. I mean, what is controversial about a 20% jump in graduation rates, double-digit jumps? We have tried to find an urban district in America that has seen this dramatic leaps in achievement in a 10-year period. If you were a black kid in Newark from the time I became mayor to the time now, your chances of going to a high-performing school that outperforms the wealthy suburbs went up 300%. Washington University did a study on us, and they called us the #1 city in America for beat the odds schools, high poverty, high performance. We had a study just looked at our schools in terms of Harvard study, look at what strategies worked. And they identified the strategies we employed as the reasons why some of the biggest jumps in achievement. Our city now beats every other state in America's PARCC scores. And I know the PARCC test itself is controversial, but it beats every other state in America's PARCC scores except for the state of New Jersey. Our charter sector, a few things we said, charters aren't good or bad. We just said, we want great schools. We're going to go after and close the bad charter schools. And we're going to say you can't cream. We're going to create a one enrollment system that says that every parent should not have to go through a lottery. It should be, every school should be treated like a public school. Which ones do you want to go to? Parents rank your top choices, and you'll get into one of your top choices. And as a result of that, Columbia University called us one of the best equity cities in terms of giving every parent a chance to go to quality schools. So I now, somebody wrote a book about 2 years after the program was installed that called it controversial. It seems to be the Bible for people studying our school system. And I'm like, wait a minute. After year 2, check after year 6, 7, 8 now, where you have all this data that show me one data point in which things have gotten worse. In fact, show me one data point where things have just gotten just as good as another school system. From East Coast to West Coast, North to South, our education system, I think, has shown better leaps in achievement. And this is the last thing I'll say.
This is what he looks like when he's almost exasperated. I learned as mayor that I learned, I always say I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark. And I have this idea, and this is why one of my legislation recently, the work, and I'll end with just this story. I was ready to give up after my first year in politics because I got elected to the Central Ward of Newark, a city council person. I was 28, 29 years old, the youngest person ever elected in my city. And the first year was horrible. I mean, I had the mayor of the city, a guy named Sharp James. If you have a chance, I mean, this guy, there's an Oscar-nominated documentary about my challenging him that lost in the Oscars to a movie called March of the Penguins. And I'm a vegan, but I make exceptions now for penguin meat, for crying out loud. Now that's exasperating.
I know I'm going to get a letter from PETA now. We believed in you, Cory. This guy, if you watch this documentary, it's on Netflix, you'll see what I was up against. And my first year in office, it came out that my phones were tapped when I was in office. I was getting my car ticketed. I mean, you'll see it if you watch the movie and give 80 minutes of your life to seeing. Anyway, and I couldn't get anything done. I thought the system was intractable. I thought the machine controlled everything, and I was ready to quit. Now, at the time, I was living in these high-rise projects, and the buildings were run by this incredible tenant president, another woman that was 4 feet and a smidgen, African-American woman, a hero to me, and always spewing wisdom. And there are days, though, that you don't want wisdom. You're just angry. And I remember I was at work talking to a woman who another set of projects had helped get me elected. The police had come out and taken over. The police didn't come out. Sorry, the drug dealers came out. And a big violent incident exploded there. The security guards literally quit the building, and it was like she was saying it was the Wild Wild West, calling me to do something about it. And I was a city council person, one vote on the council, and I just told her, I can't do anything. I can't get anything done. I can't even get the cops to stop ticketing my car, not to mention go out to these projects. And so we started arguing. Here's this woman, this elder that got me elected, walked me door to door in her buildings. I won in a runoff election, and now we're yelling at each other, and I'm disrespecting her. And I slammed down the phone, and I'm done. First year as a politician, I'm going to quit. And I got in my car, drove home, parked, and I'm about to go into the projects where I live, the building I lived, and all I wanted to do was enter an intimate embrace of my 2 favorite friends, Ben and Jerry. That's all I wanted to do was sit there. And as I'm walking to the door, there's Miss Jones, and I'm trying to avoid her because I don't need her wisdom. And so I try to walk past her without just a grunting of a hello. And she looks at me walking away, and she lets me get a few paces, then she just goes, don't you walk away from me, boy. And I'm just, damn it. And I turn around, and she could read my face, and she looks at me, and she goes, come here and give Miss Jones a hug. And I walked over to her, and I hugged her with the least amount of sincerity. It's like one of those times you break up with somebody, you said, let's just be friends, and you kind of give each other a hug. It was horrible. I just wanted to hug her and go to Ben and Jerry. And so she hugs me, and I start to turn around again, and she goes, tell Miss Jones what's wrong, like in a sensitive, sweet voice. I know she didn't mean it. And I look at her, I go, you want to know what's wrong? She goes, tell Miss Jones. And I go, and I just unloaded on her. I was sick and tired at City Hall. I've been in the office for a year. I can't get anything done. I can't get anything passed. Just vented on this woman, everything. And then I told her about the crisis at Garden Spires, just vented on her. Then I sounded myself incredibly impotent. And I said, I don't know what to do about Garden Spires. I just don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden, she looked as if God spoke to her. She goes, oh my gosh. And I stopped. She stopped my pity party and my record. And I look at her and I go, what? She goes, I know what you should do. And I'm like, what? And she looks at me, she goes, yep, I know what you should do. And I go, I heard you the first time, what should I do? And she goes, I know what you should do. And I go, Miss Jones, stop playing with me. Tell me what I should do. And she goes, you, and I lean forward. She goes, you should, and I lean forward a little bit more. She goes, you should do, and I'm like, yeah. She goes, you should do something. And I'm like, that's it? And she goes, yep, do something. And I was so angry, I turned around, I stormed off to my building, and I have this theory that God has dominion over the universe, except for one place, which is public housing elevators. And so the damn elevator wasn't working. I hiked 16 flights of stairs, and I get into my apartment out of breath. I go to the fridge, I grab my Ben and my Jerry, and I sit there with my chubby hubby, and I'll never forget this. I'm one of these guys that says, before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me and how you treat other people. But I am a person of faith, and the Bible was there, and I flipped it open, and there was this passage, with faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. But then the one after that was, but sometimes you should fast and pray. And I started looking at this, and I thought to myself, and I started laughing. And I said, here I'm ready to give up and quit and go back to what I was doing before. But she's right. I haven't put it all out there. I haven't really tried. And so the long story short is I call up my aide, and I ask them to get me a tent. And in short, we built a tent between the two projects. I walk out to go there, and I see Miss Elaine Sewell, the woman I had yelled at on the phone, and I began to apologize to her, and she just hugs me. And there may or may not have been tears. And I said, Elaine, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to do something. And I told her, I'm just going to move into this tent. And I said, I want to fast, and I want to pray every day. And I said, would you help me? Would you pray with me? And she said, not just that. She goes, we're going to do more. And then I did something that you have to do if you're a politician. You have to know how to do this. I called a press conference. And I literally said, this is the United States of America. How could people live in fear to walk outside their own community? I gave this big speech. Other politicians came. And then I went under the tent. And that night, under the tent, that first night, the drug dealers probably were really upset that we had plopped ourselves right in the middle of where they were doing their work. And we had everything from dirty diapers thrown on top of the tent. Everything was a long, sleepless night. The next morning, I wake up, and these big 10 guys come to the tent. The leader came over and said, are you Cory Booker? And I said, yeah. And they go, well, we're correctional officers at the local prison, jail, and we're not going to let you stay out here alone. And throughout the course of that day, dozens and dozens of people showed up. By the time 2-3 days passed, hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. Hospitals came out to do health screenings. UPS was the first company. Others followed to do job trainings and job hiring. People were getting hired. Over the course of 10 days of on this hunger strike, over 1,000 people came out. We were doing a de facto camp for the kids. I had never seen so many kids playing because it was safe in the community. And then finally, after 10 days, the mayor of the city, I had lost so much weight. I'm sitting there watching it. I got really ticked off because some guy from New York watched it on the news, sent over like 100 pizzas, which really ticked me off because I was on a hunger strike. And after the 10th day, the mayor of the city, my arch rival, comes out. And you know, something about fasting and praying for 10 days, I stopped seeing him as an adversary. I stopped seeing him as evil. I stopped seeing him as all the things I'd whipped up in my mind. And I'll never forget, we hugged each other. And as I hugged him, first time I had hugged this guy, and I still remember breathing, he's my father's age, and he smelled like my dad and uncle. It was unbelievable. He had these prepared remarks, and I think he was ready to say something, but saw how I greeted him. He put away the remarks and just started speaking to the crowd We would gather hundreds to hear what he and I had to say. And he actually made a prediction. He predicted that where there was a Ken Gibson, who was one of the first black mayors in America, there would be a Sharp James. Where there's a Sharp James, there'll be a Cory, Booker one day, and others. He literally predicted that I would be the next mayor. We hugged and everything, had this big thing. He told the crowd, I'm going to bring police out here, and then I'm going to build a park. The kids had no place to play. I'm going to build a park. Now, that's not the success of the story, because the story actually had a kind of a bad ending. The mayor kept police out there for about 6 months, and they left, and guess what happened? A lot of the problems came back. The mayor never built a park, even though I allocated money for it. Hey, look, 10 years or so later, I became the mayor. We built the park and tried some other things. But the end of the stories I want to tell you about is this. I believe the biggest mistake we often make is we allow our inability to do everything to undermine our determination to do something. I had no control over the schools. I was mayor of the city. They're a separate governmental entity. But my closest aide said to me, you can't allow this to go on. You may not have any official power, but you have agency. Everyone has agency. But we have grown this level of comfort in this country with injustices that if we were forced to look at them, they should rile up our outrage. That every day we should understand that I can't solve all the problems in the world, but I can do something. And sometimes a small action reverberates into space and time. But more importantly, sometimes an action inspires the next person and the next person and the next person. The end of the story for me is very simple. We gave our last prayer on these projects underneath the highway that people used to pass by. Now, instead of the first day, just a few of us praying and shaking, now there were hundreds of people joining hands. And to this day, maybe competing with the time I went to the Dulles airport and watched hundreds of people cheer Muslims coming off of the plane in Dulles airport. This is one of my favorite moments I've ever had as an American. That here I was in the projects holding hands with hundreds of people for the final prayer. There were Muslims and Christians, there were Jewish folks, there were rabbis and imams and priests and ministers, there were young folks and old folks, believers and non-believers, and all of us were holding hands under an overpass between two buildings, and people started praying. Now, I hadn't eaten for 10 days, and I was weak as everything, but when I held hands with those folks, to this day, it's one of the strongest I've ever felt as a human being. And when people started praying, I heard the words of our ancestors. I heard that Jewish prayer sung during the high holidays, Ki beiti beit tefillah l'chocho min. May my house be a house of prayer for many nations together. I heard the words of a minister who was jailed in Birmingham who said we were all caught in that inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. I heard the ideals of an old African saying that says sticks in a bundle can't be broken. And I heard these three words from a dead language that are actually the hallmark of a nation still yearning to make real on those words. E pluribus unum. I don't want to wait for the next presidential election. I don't want to wait till November. I want all of us right now, this moment, to start trying our best to live our values, to be courageous, to break out of our echo chambers, to reach out our hands, because I am tired of people who preach their religion but don't live it. But our civic gospel, we literally swear oaths every day to be a nation of liberty and justice for all. But what matters is not our hand over our hearts. What matters is how much we're reaching out our hands. How many of us have worshiped in another house of worship that's not our own? How many of us have gone to a community that we're not comfortable in, where we are conspicuous? How many of us have gone online and taken the hatred of trolls and just said back to them, I love you unconditionally? How many of us have just thought of a creative form of protest, no matter how small, but to do something that's not expected of us, that might change the temperature of a situation or inspire somebody to join with you in your hands and to circle up and to manifest love? I end with this quote. In fact, it's a poem. It means so much to me because it's what my parents used to read me as a kid. And they knew it was different for them. My parents integrated a neighborhood. My dad called us the 4 raisins in a tub of vanilla ice cream. But you know, sometimes when you grow up as the only one in a community, you have tough days, and my parents knew that. And my parents were worried that my self-esteem would be crushed by beauty standards that didn't have guys with afros, which I used to have, and wider nose and bigger lips. And they worried that I was going to forget who I was and how I got there, and I'd get lectured all the time. Boy, don't walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. And they wanted me to understand that they loved this country, even though I heard the ugliest stories about America around my kitchen table. My parents who didn't flinch in talking to me about the racism and bigotry, but they loved America. They would always remind me that it was black people and white people. It was Jewish folks and Muslim folks. It was gay folks and straight folks who did things to open up the doors for my family. And so here's a poem at the end of it that they read to me. And they wanted me to understand the difference between words and actions. That they wanted me to swear an oath to my country in the way that Langston Hughes asked. And I'll end with this, so I know I'm over time. Langston Hughes wrote, "Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, but yet must be, the land where everyone is free. The poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. And who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again. Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be." May we every day swear that oath, not with words, but with deeds, not with grand gestures or moments, but with the small, indelible acts of kindness, of decency and love. And I am here and you are here, not because of presidents and senators. We're here because of ordinary Americans who showed that extraordinary commitment one to another, who ignited small acts of love that built this nation into what we have now. We stand on the mightiest platform on the planet Earth. So many billions would rather be where we are. We have to now take this platform and build this nation so we achieve a much higher level. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.